Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Staffordshire Police, Fire and Crime Panel. It is the 6th of February 2023. We've got quite an important agenda, so which has been circulated. This is an open public section of the meeting that may be filmed for live or later broadcasting or other use, and if you are at the meeting, you are being filmed and deemed to have agreed to being filmed as to the use of the recording for broadcast and or other purposes. So we'll crack on. Before I go to apologies, because it does include our chairman, Councillor Bernard Peters, and he is recovering from an operation on his knee. So on your behalf, I will send him our best wishes for a speedy recovery. I did have some communication with him. He's telling me that he's recovering well, but obviously it's not an easy one with a knee op. So we send him our best wishes. So if we can continue with apologies, please, Mandy.
I've received apologies from Councillor Peters, Chairman, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Jones and Councillor Summers, who has sent his substitute, Councillor Maycock.
Okay, so just to confirm then, Stoke City Council and Cannock Chase District Council, we do not have substitutes. Okay, thank you. Item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest you wish to declare? If the meeting progresses and suddenly thought that there is, please indicate and we can always address that as we go along in the meeting. Item number 3 is questions to the Police, Fire, Crime Commissioner from members of the public.
Minutes first.
So, sorry, I do apologise, it wasn't on my list. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, I'm being told. Do we agree that those form a true and accurate assessment of that meeting? So if happy, Phil Hudson has proposed and seconded by Tony Holmes. So I'm happy to sign those, thank you. So I was a bit previous on that, so the questions to the Police, Fire, Crime Commissioner from members of the public, that has been circulated with responses given by Mr. Adams.
Yes,
Andy?
the 2 questions raised by Mrs Mallender have been responded to on the agenda. We've also had a question since the agenda was published from Mr Bradbury. His question and the Commissioner's response will appear in the minutes as there's electronic links to the question, the response, sorry.
Okay, so as neither are here to ask a supplementary question, I will now proceed to item 4, or 5 as it might be, proposed fire and rescue budget, the precept 23-24. Mr. Adams.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, could I just qualify before we start? We're correct in terms of numbers for the... Good, that's a relief. Chairman, panel, really pleased to present you with what is my second budget, and just to share with you how we've got to this before I ask my colleague David to take us through some of the detail. And a big thanks to David and to Emma and John back at the Police HQ for really quite a complicated budget round this time with the perfect storm that I think we've got facing the country at the moment as we come out of the pandemic. We're essentially fighting a proxy war and suffering from supply-led inflation costs. Now, the good news is that Staffordshire Police continues to be an exceptionally well-managed service. Financially, it is one of the stronger. We made good provision last year for many of the cost increases that have materialised, although, like everywhere else, didn't quite get there in terms of pay implications. Although I would remind you that the police service do not have, certainly police officers, they're not permitted to take industrial action. They have to abide by the national pay agreements. My own view is that the police officers are due a substantive pay rise, that they've had something reflecting inflation from 2 years ago and not what is affecting us all right now. So this MTFS is based on settlements and forecasts that we have of settlements from government, which I don't think take full account of what is likely to be a necessary pay increase for officers and staff next year. And I'm expecting government to step forward into that space, because whilst I think we can go to residents and talk about council tax increases, that has to be around additionality and maintaining service, not around pay increases that the rest of the public sector are enjoying. So, where have we got to here? We've got a good balanced budget. It allows for continued investment. It allows for an additional 60 police officers over and above the officers that are coming to us as part of our share of national uplift, which means with a fair wind, we'll have 2,000 police officers on the books in Staffordshire by March next year. And that is getting on for 400 more than we had back in 2019. And it means I will meet my commitment to add 250 officers from being elected last year. I'm delighted to be able to confirm that, not least because when we talk to residents about paying a little more in council tax, if it means extra officers, extra visible policing, extra local resources, they are mostly comfortable with that contribution. Staffordshire Police remain an excellent value for money service. We're a low crime place, but we're also a low cost service. Per head of population, we're the 5th lowest in England and Wales in terms of the cost per head of providing a service. That is not to distract from the fact that it is primarily due to good management, good cost control, and very efficient services, as well as maintaining one of the highest levels of visible policing numbers in the service. Some places have a lot of police officers in staff roles. We have substantially more officers as a proportion in frontline policing visible roles, which is good stuff. Savings have been made this year. In fact, savings have been far exceeded this year from what we'd planned, which is great news. I think it's to great credit of everybody that a real understanding that we need to find capacity to invest. And what that means, in addition to the additional officers, is that we're going to be investing in technology for tackling vehicle crime, identifying criminals using our roads more effectively. In recent panel meetings, we've heard about increases in particular vehicle-related crime, but also the number of people crossing into Staffordshire and out of it using our excellent road network, and we're going to be investing in the provision of more automatic number plate recognition technology to help deal with that. It also means we're funding through our capital programme the essential firearms training centre, which the panel have had detail of earlier this year. A considerable investment, but one that's absolutely necessary to maintain our safety. And we're also investing in new requirements for personal safety training, and this is part of a national move to improve the capabilities and professionalism of the service. So this is a budget which absolutely balances, to my mind, the correct demand of the public to see an improved service. It provides the Chief Constable with the resources he needs to get us out of the engaged process with His Majesty's inspectors as soon as possible. We hope to hear publicly about the progress that has been made on that at the end of this week, by the way. There should be an announcement on Friday from HMI. But it also gives our Chief Constable, Chris Noble, funding to invest in technology and personnel. And that's all about getting back to being an outstanding police service. My own office is continuing to be committed to investing in prevention, diversionary activities, particularly for young people, and supporting victims. And you'll see in the papers, Chair, that over the lifetime of this MTFS, my office costs will be falling in real terms. And whilst I'll be maintaining the spend on commission services because they are essential, it actually includes for a considerable additional amount to be invested in domestic abuse support and prevention over the next 3 years. Now that's really important because we're seeing quite a considerable uptick since the pandemic related to domestic abuse. But I'm covering that within the existing funding space, not calling on extra police resources to do that. So I'm keen to present a budget which asks for an additional £1 a month from residents in a Band D property, £12 a year, and that's the equivalent of about 4.83%. It's below headline inflation. I think it's appropriate, however, to point out that because of that pay settlement for police, headline inflation is not quite the level that inflation in real terms has hit the organisation in terms of pay. I'm very conscious of what's coming down the line. It requires us to use the reserves we set aside last year for the balancing the MTFS, which we'll continue to do. But we've got a strong capital programme, investment, more officers, more opportunity for our great team to continue on their rapid improvement. And Chair, with your permission, I'd like David just to take us through some of the detail and then perhaps we could take some questions.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the panel. So there are 4 papers in front of us today. There's the main event, which is the budget report, including the MTFS, and then there are 3 additional papers which really just support that overall budget and MTFS paper. So the capital strategy, the reserve strategy, and also the Treasury Management Report. So I'm not going to cover those 3 reports in detail, but I will pick out certain elements of those 3 reports because the detail basically sits within the main report anyway. So in terms of setting the budget and the MTFS for this year, I think it's been quite challenging on the backdrop of tighter public finances and high inflation, which of course has been impacting upon us all. The volatility really does mean that we may not get all the assumptions right again this year. I think it's certainly proved that this year where things have moved and things have changed very quickly indeed. Yeah, but hopefully I think the budget report and into the medium term provides us with a good platform to move forward and importantly, as mentioned by the Commissioner, provides additional investment during the MTFS period. So the budget proposals that are contained within the report for the panel to consider today is for a revenue budget to be set at £242.9 million, and that is based upon the figures that were issued as part of the local government finance settlement back on the 14th of December of last year, which was followed by a written statement by the Minister, and also now has been backed up by the final settlement that came through last week as well. So I'm just going to highlight, if that's okay with members of the panel, just one or two of the key elements of the budget, if that's okay. So firstly, the Commissioner's already touched on this, so the budget includes a proposed increase in Band D council tax of £12. So that's 4.83% or £1 per month. So that increases the Band D council tax to £260.57. Now that is £3 below the referendum limit that was set at £15 or circa 6% for Staffordshire. So it's around about 1.2% below that maximum permitted level. If I could also mention to the panel as well, the MTFS, when we look forward, does include a lower assumption around council tax increases for 24-25, and at the moment we've reverted back to the 2.99% assumption. Although within the local government finance settlement it does allow for a higher increase or a £10 increase for 24-25, but the Commission has been through the assumptions and we've stuck with that 2.99% for the following 2 years. So I think when we look at that assumption, the proposed increase in council tax that's been put forward today is below, and importantly is below those headline levels of inflation, and that summary of inflation is included within the budget report. If I can just talk as well briefly about the backdrop of the financial settlement, the police settlement headlined a total extra funding available to forces of £523.4 million. Of this, the large proportion, £349 million, came from an assumption that forces would increase that council tax by the full £15. The rest of the funding is made up nationally of £29.9 million of core funding and £140 million of police uplift funding. So meaning there's been an overall increase in central funding of £174.4 million. When we look at what that means in Staffordshire, including the police uplift, the core grant has moved from 145.2 to 147.8 million. So that's an increase of 2.6 million, of which the uplift is 2.1 million. And just to complicate it a little bit, that 2.1 million also includes the pay award grant provision that was allowed for this year because of the police pay award settlement being higher than was in forces budgets. The proposed budget for 24-25 includes, and the Commissioner has just mentioned this, it includes a balanced position for 23-4 and also a balanced position for 24-5. So that's a balanced position for 2 years, and as the Commissioner says, including that use of the budget support reserve that's been built up over the last sort of two financial years. But we still have got, and this is in line really with what we've presented to the panel before, we have still got a gap in the medium-term financial strategy. So we've got a gap of £4.3 million by 2026 and £5.5 million by 2027. So there is still some work around transformation that's required into the medium term in order to make the savings that will be required. The budget for 23-4 includes a contribution from reserves of 1.3 million, of which 0.4 comes from the budget support reserve. Then we've got an extra £300,000 that's supporting major policing events, which includes the King's coronation for this year, and also £600,000 of reserve that's supporting commission services, which again is part of that is the domestic abuse contract that we've discussed earlier. Also as well, and the budget includes, as discussed previously, is that uplift of 60 officers, taking that up over and beyond the uplift programme of 1940, going up to 2,000 officers. Now, of course, there is significant risk within the budget in the MTFS, which is highlighted within the paper, But of course, there's still a lot of uncertainty around future pay awards and quite what that looks like as we move forward. And again, of course, uncertainty around the inflation. Obviously, we've seen hyperinflation this year across certain areas of the budget. Now, inflation is predicted to reduce during the budget year, but of course, we are still making assumptions about what that's going to look like into the medium term. The details that are contained within the budget report that you see today have all been through the governance process. So the Police Strategic Governance Board that's chaired by the Commissioner has fully reviewed the assumptions within this paper, and that was discussed on the 26th of January. And can I also note as well for the panel, just to note that the Commissioner has engaged with local residents and stakeholders as per his commitment, really, in relation to the precept. And in terms of the response, the full report is attached to this paper, but overall 58% of the respondents did support an increase in the police and crime precept. And that's fully detailed within Appendix 9 of the report. So if I can just highlight for the panel just some key areas of the supplementary reports, if I may. So in terms of that overall precept requirement and what does it look like, so the total, the budget includes 95.15 million of precept, of which 1.2 million is from the reported council tax surplus. So this is the surplus on the council tax, and also a 1.46% increase in the council tax base that we've seen this year. So the council tax base has recovered quite well, actually, probably post the pandemic, and we're predicting that that's going to continue at around about 1.5% into the medium term. But all the details of the precept are within paragraph 3.6, there's details somewhere around 3.6, and within appendices 3, 4, 5 and 6 of the main report. So this results in a total council tax increase of 6 million. And when we put that into context, because the police uplift and the national position probably was a little bit lower than we anticipated, 70% of the budget increase that you see does come from the council tax proposal and the increase in the council tax base and the surplus on the council tax as well. If I can just say one or two things about the capital programme, just moving on. You have got a full capital strategy contained within a separate paper, but the capital programme is fully listed within Appendix 7 of the main report and sits at £15.4 million for next year. Now, as you've already heard, this does include the investment into the 50-metre armed training facility on police headquarters at £14.65 million. And I think the panel have already been briefed that the Commissioner took the decision to move this project forward to a pre-planning application point. I think you've all seen the detail for that proposal. A comprehensive review of the capital programme has been undertaken across the police force and with Emma and the team, and that has delivered savings across the MTFS period that's scheduled within paragraph 8.4 of the report. Just moving on then to reflect on the investment strategy and how that sits with the budget that's in front of you today. We have, of course, fully reviewed the investment and borrowing strategy that's included within the Treasury Management Strategy. Now, based upon the capital financing requirement and the level that's cash that's held, it's not anticipated that there will be any new borrowing required until probably 2025, 2026. In fact, external borrowing is forecast to reduce from £67.2 million down to £61.5 million by March 2025 as scheduled loans are repaid during that period. The investment strategy for next year is set out within the report, and with investment returns, they have significantly increased during the year because of the impact of rising and increasing interest rates that we've seen. So a combination of cash balances and the balances that we hold have meant that we've temporarily increased the level of our money market funds up to £5 million during 23-4 as we've done this year. But I think it's important that cash balances will still be used in lieu of borrowing across as long as we can during the MTFS period, because that's a far better way of actually providing finance for our capital programme. particularly being as borrowing rates have significantly increased over the last 12 months. In terms of the reserve strategy, the reserve strategy is set out within a main report again. The budget includes, as the Commissioner says, an unwinding of the budget support reserve during 23-4 and 24-5, which importantly results in that balanced position for the next 2 years. When we look at reserves in total, we've got a general reserve that sits at £9.7 million, which is in line with the Commissioner's strategy to hold a minimum of 3% of the revenue budget as a general reserve. And then we've got earmarked reserves that do reduce down to £19.8 million by 26-27. But I think importantly that overall the reserves remain in a healthy position over the MTFS period. So if I can just summarise, Chairman, if that's okay, and then I'm sure the panel have got a number of questions. But in summary, the budget for 23-4 shows a balanced position with some investment in police officer numbers based upon the £12 increase in Band D council tax that's in front of you today. The MTFS is balanced for 24-5, but will require some saving and transformation into the medium term, and I think that's clearly laid out within the paper. So, Chairman, I think happy to take any questions, but I'd like the panel just to ask the panel to note the recommendations that are contained within the report and the statement made by myself on the robustness of the budget and the reserves position as required by Section 25 of the Local Government Act, and that's within paragraph 9 of the report. So, back to you, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for a very comprehensive appraisal of your the budget there. So I'm open to questions from members. Councillor Edgeler.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, David, for your report, and thank you, Commissioner, for explaining all that to us, which is very interesting. My question really relates to the installation of the new fire range at police headquarters. What revenue do you expect to receive back from renting the fire range out to other forces? What sort of money do you expect back in? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Edgeler. I think in the previous briefing we outlined that that's no longer a substantive element of the proposal. We expect the firing range to be primarily used for the service, Staffordshire service. If there's an opportunity to rent it out to others, it's going to be minimal and not a significant contribution to the to meeting the costs. Once we got really into the detail of it, it's almost a 2/3 utilisation of the space. And when you then build in cleaning, maintenance and all the other stuff that needs to be done to maintain a safe space, there isn't a lot of opportunity to rent it to others. I was particularly discouraged in early plans at what was perceived to be income. It got nowhere near to meeting the costs of renting it. So it's not part of the equation really for us. But you'll see in the capital programme that the build through the development of that is all firmly built into the plan. However, as David reminded me, we've still got to get through planning, and actually I believe we're still coming back to you to make sure that we're all comfortable with the proposals being on track as they were when originally presented.
Thank you for that, Commissioner.
Phil Hudson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioner and David. So a 4.83% increase in £1 a month for Band D, I think is quite a reasonable request. I don't have a problem with that. However, I'm going to ask you some questions about the value for money, and these are things that the members of the public, particularly within East Staffordshire, are asking me. Okay, so I note in the report that it says that we've got the lowest levels of crime in the country and we're reducing levels of ASB. What evidence is there of that? Or is it a case that the public are not reporting cases of minor crimes and ASB because they find it difficult to report or think it's a waste of time? And that's the public perception that I'm getting. I'm not saying that that is reality, but that's one question. If you'd like to answer that first, and then I can go on to my others.
Thanks, Councillor Hudson. I think that's sort of essentially the nature of the conversation we have at this panel most of the rest of the year, isn't it, around performance rather than budget. But I think it's well made. I wouldn't say we're the lowest crime in the country. In fact, at the moment, I believe we're about 8th lowest. So still good. There was a very interesting piece of research done by Sun Life the other day that identified Staffordshire as the safest place to live in the country. That was including crime levels along with health levels as well. Very reassuring to all of us who live here. I think Tamworth, which is down the road from me, was identified as the 4th safest town in the country. So there is a lot of positivity. However, interestingly, in our survey of perception, which you rightly refer to, people in Tamworth are less confident that they are safe than almost anywhere else in Staffordshire. So perception and reality don't always marry up. And I see that very much as part of my job, along with the service, to get the facts out there and help people to feel safe when they can be safe. Considerable improvement in our contact in terms of the time it's taking to answer 999 and 101 calls. That was fundamentally part of what I set out for the service to do last year. They're now making considerable improvements with that. And there's no evidence at all at the moment that people aren't reporting incidents or indeed providing intelligence and helpful intelligence using those mechanisms. But we will be covering that, I'm sure, again at every future meeting. And Ms Hudson, I agree with you. I think it is actually value for money, given that that's below inflation. It's actually below the level of increases that a lot of people will have had in their pay packets already or are due to have, certainly if their pensions are increasing by 10%. This is a fair ask, I think. But I do understand that it really is quite tough out there at the moment, more than quite tough. It's proper tough for a lot of people. And I was just reflecting on the consultation. Brilliant. We had nearly 2,000 people this year responding, twice the amount of last year. And whilst David said 58% said, yes, we'll take an increase, that means 42% said they don't want one. And I know that that is more than almost anywhere else in the country, which I think is interesting. Might be a challenge to how we've phrased our questions in the consultation. I try and be completely straight with those questions. But for me, that was the reason I didn't go for the maximum £15. You could argue £3, £5, £10 if it's a big house extra is not a lot of money. People value a visible, effective police force. However, if you keep adding it year after year after year, it's already £260 there for a Band D property. Every bit matters at the moment. So I was very keen to get the budget based on what we need as a service to give people what they want. And that is fundamentally around the sort of visible, local, responsive policing that I know people are asking for in East Staffs.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner. That's great. I wondered if you might be able to send me some figures about the perception in East Staffs. I understand what you're saying about Tamworth. They don't feel as safe as should do. I don't know if there's any figures available for us to have a look at in East Staff so I can go out there and promote it.
I'll definitely be bringing that forward, Chairman, to a future panel. We've done one round of surveys. The Chief Constable and I are very keen to do this. It wasn't being done consistently for a period of time. The second round, I believe, is underway now, and it's what's called, I can't actually remember the name, but essentially we're contacting people without an interest. So it's not necessarily a social media-based one where people are enthusiastic about the service or responding for one reason or another, or critical. We're going to people in the houses and saying, what are you thinking? And I think after this second round, we'll be confident enough in the numbers to share it. It was quite remarkable that crime levels and perception were not in line. Parts of the county where it's a bit busier, people were much more confident a good job was being done. So we do have to balance that up and understand it. Going to definitely bring that back.
Yeah, thank you. what is commendable, I think, is that we've got 94.4% of our officers are front line. That's the third highest in the country. However, the public perception is, particularly in the rural area, is they don't see officers about. And I've got to be honest that I know that the Chief Constable has changed where the response teams are on that, but still in the rural area, I don't feel that we have, or the perception is that we don't have an increase in visibility. And obviously, if people pay more money, they're quite happy, but they want to see what they're getting for the money. Partly, to add on to that, a lot of people are saying to me they want to see more warranted officers out there on patrol. I don't know, I know it's not your position about how the police patrol, but they want to see more visible foot patrols sometimes in some areas. So they're saying to me, can we see more warranted officers actually patrolling our streets? Or could you consider with the Chief Constable increasing the powers of our PCSOs? Because they're looking at value for money and they want to see what they're getting. So they're either saying, can we have more warranted officers on foot patrols or so we can see them, or can we give our PCSOs more powers? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, it sounds like you might have missed out on my public performance meeting with the Chief Constable only a week or so ago. I know some of the panel members were there, attended in person. We went into that in a great deal of detail. The new operating model, as you say, is placing more emphasis on local policing, visible policing, officers and PCSOs being in public places, high streets, community centres, areas where they can meet the public and discuss issues as well as getting about the job. He will also, he did explain at the meeting, that we're not fully there yet on our capacity. Come April or May, they'll be up to their design number, and then we're adding these extra officers in again next year. The new model is sort of partially delivering because we haven't quite got the full complement of officers out of training yet. But it is absolutely changed already, getting no end of positive feedback about people grateful to be seeing where their council tax is going, exactly what they want, visible, responsive policing. And we covered it in some detail. I would urge members, again, through you, Chairman, as many of you as possible can work. You can go back to those public performance meetings. There's a substantial amount of data goes with it as well, just to qualify these points. And the more you can share them in your localities, help people to feel the difference, that would be really much appreciated. A lot of hard work going in getting that right, and it's going well.
And the final point is I see that you're going to spend nearly £600,000 on Burton Police Station, and I really welcome that, to get it up to standard according to your capital expenditure. Could we consider, look, I know there's a problem with the cell block there, but there's 16 cells. So whether we could, look at in the future reopening Burton Police Station cell block, I don't know. I mean, we're on about zero tolerance policing, but it's very difficult for us to have zero tolerance policing when they've got to drive to either Etruria or down to Cannock to the custody places. It takes up, officer time. It's also environmentally not friendly because we're using vehicles to drive everybody. Whereas if we had more local custody areas, which we've got 16 cells in Burton, would cut the travelling time down a lot, cut emissions down a lot, and cut the officer time when they're not on patrol down by quite significant times. Thank you.
Thanks again. Interesting question, Chairman. We touched on it a little while ago. There's a piece of work on the to do on the operating model, evaluate the effect that has had, because we think it's already changing some of the measures around custody. It was fascinating last year. Helen, my deputy, and I visited the custody suite in Stoke. They're quite different places, from even 10 or 20 years ago. The level of the sheer number of people who are involved in managing a custody suite, and the cost and the safety particularly, they're almost like state-of-the-art health units. There's a considerable investment already in the one in Stoke-on-Trent and the one at Watling Street. Only recently all the cells have had to be refurbished because of to keep people safe so they don't take advantage of areas where they might do themselves harm in the units. So it's a highly complicated world. Now, I do know in some of the parts of the country, they've actually dropped, in some cases, a number of custody suites to build what they need to do to meet standards in one new super suite. Now, I don't want to go there. I agree. We want the right number in the right places. And that is something that is continually being reviewed. But at the moment, we've got good custody provision. We just need to understand whether it's affordable or good use of resources, as you've already challenged me on, to consider alternative locations as well. Suffice to say, although the Burton station is relatively new, there would be a considerable amount of work needed to bring that up to today's standards in terms of custody. Okay, thank you.
Happy? Yep, okay. Councillor Tony Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, it's just two little points I've got. You're not proposing to rob Peter to pay Paul where PCSOs are concerned, are you? Pulling PCSOs to make them full police officers.
There's a decision been made here to freeze PCSO numbers at where they are today, pretty much. Our PCSO numbers have stayed really relatively constant over the last 10 years or so, even whilst officer numbers bounced around. And we really value them. They're a fantastic resource, particularly in neighbourhood policing. They really understand the relationship. However, I get as many challenges about maintaining your PCSO numbers for X or Y, Z reason as I do about they don't have a warrant, there are certain powers they don't have. And it really depends which side of the fence you're on. Now, when I talk to the Chief Constable about this, he is adamant. Good neighbourhood policing needs both. It needs officers and it needs PCSOs. Working to their strengths and, where possible, working together. And the advantage of having more officers is we can get more officers with the rights to arrest and all the rest of it, alongside those PCSOs out in their neighbourhoods. And that is the model going forward. You're likely to see more officers in Staffordshire. I don't think you're going to be seeing many more PCSOs in Staffordshire. But interestingly, whilst we're low on officer numbers, we are not low on PCSO numbers. We're above average on PCSO numbers per population. So we're trying to rebalance that. That's as far as I want to go, because that is absolutely an operational matter for the Chief Constable. But I think he's getting this balance right in terms of what the community want.
I asked that question because, again, it's perception. People aren't seeing those PCSOs. They're seeing one or two. When one goes off, another one comes on. And they're only seeing two for the area.
Yeah, but if I may, Mr. Holmes, in other parts of the country, they don't see any. And as a result of what's happened in the last year, you know, there are some police service areas that are in real financial trouble. And because they are required to maintain their new officer investment, they will be reducing PCSO and staff numbers. So I would say we're in a good place.
I'll agree with you, honestly and truthfully. But we are not some of those places. We're Staffordshire. We want a better PCSO service. The other question was, in part of your budget, you're using your reserves, and within 2 years, that reserve will be zero. That worries me slightly, as if that part just goes a little bit pear-shaped. Where are you going to pull that when your reserve is zero?
It would worry me too if it was all our reserves, but it's not. There is a reserve that was, I believe, firstly identified by David and colleagues 2 years ago to cover the MTFS shortfall, effectively to help us to manage into a position of greater efficiency. And what we're doing is, as per last year, we're looking to use that MTFS over the next 2 years to balance the books. I won't say substantial because I think we've got the right amount of reserves. Some places have got very high reserves, some are a bit tight. And as we found with the Queen passing away this year, for example, suddenly reserves can be used up very quickly on unknown things. So we've got an appropriate number of reserves. That particular one, which is earmarked for MTFS, is carrying forward pretty much as last year to cover us for the next 2 financial years. And I've got that right, David, haven't I? Good. Good. I'm doing all right so far.
Okay. Anything more to come back on? No? Jill Haysom.
Thank you. Councillor Heath from Newcastle Borough Council. I don't want to keep harking on about PCSOs, but would you be supportive of further powers for PCSOs? I understand what my colleague over there is saying about public perception and seeing people on foot patrol, and they do see PCSOs. But certainly for things like enforcing PSPOs, parking, particularly around schools, and lower level ASB, it could be very useful and it wouldn't take away from officer time for other things.
Councillor Heatham, as I mentioned there, I've talked to the Chief about this quite a bit. His view is if we need officers, there'll be officers. So if a PCSO is outside a school, identifies a problem, they will be able to call in the support of their neighbourhood officer team, and if necessary, they'll nick a few people or certainly put out the right advice. And I'm hoping you're already seeing that in Newcastle, because particularly on the high street up there, much improved response from the public about the visible policing and the activity up there. It's about more officers rather supporting the PCSOs and allowing them to do what they do best.
Yeah, I understand that and I agree with you. It has been very effective in the town centre with officers, but I find it a bit confusing. I was a PSCO myself quite a while ago, and at that time we did have powers to give out fixed penalties, and it appears that they don't have that now, and certainly with schools it's a huge contention with parking around schools.
Okay, if I could move on to Adrian Bowen, please. Lady said Brown.
I'm not sure who I am. Can somebody tell me? Right. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner. A couple of points, if I may, please, out of your executive summary on page 17. But the 2 items there I'd like to focus on. One is that you mentioned that it's anticipated that inflation and wage growth will fall back to the Bank of England target inflation of 2%. I really hope that's right, but I'm not personally very optimistic. But I take it that's the target. On the other hand, in the next paragraph, you mentioned that with the current external environment, it's more volatile than previous, increasing the likelihood of budget assumptions being materially challenged in a year. Sounds a wonderful euphemism, that does, materially challenged. But, and you've spoke a few minutes ago about your confidence in the adequacy of the reserves we've got. I wonder if you give us some indication, please, what would it take to actually go beyond that level of reserves? What are the danger signals? What are the intense pressures that we should be mindful of that could actually turn this quite reasonably strong position, could put us into trouble? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bowen. As I said in my introduction, really, which wasn't specifically set out in the papers, my own view is that we've got to get the balance right between core government funding and what we ask people to pay for locally. And at the moment, the core government settlements are based on their best effort to make a 3-year forecast 18 months ago, when inflation was quite different, particularly around pay. Now, we had a good go last year, and I believe we went in 1% higher than nearly every other service on what we expected our pay settlements to be. And we were nearer, as a result of that, than anyone else. And government came forward with some pay uplift to help us with it. That 2%, or those numbers in there, are largely based on what government is saying their key national forecasts are now saying. And it was helpful to note, or reassuring to note, that they did come down even during November, December, when we were working up these numbers. So they were higher for a while and there was a bigger gap. Really, everything I'm saying there is that it's uncertain. It is uncertain. And we have reserves to manage uncertainty, but reserves can only be spent once. If you start having inflation that sticks, particularly in pay, it's there forever. And it would then need remodelling, some sort of different efficiencies, or for central resources to cover the difference. Now, we are seeing that in some other public services, and I suspect we may see something similar in police if it gets to that point. But at the moment, we're budgeting based on what we know we'll be covered for in the settlement. We've got used now, well, you and I will remember inflation, I'm sure. You're probably not as old as me, but I remember it. And the last sort of 10 years, it's been a different sort of budget setting environment where inflation really hasn't featured. And I was astonished to find, for example, in many of the support services that I commissioned, there was no real allowance for inflation, even though some of them were running for 3 or 4 years. Going forward, that is just not, we're back into the real world where that is just not possible. So there will always be, I think, uncertainty in just how accurately we forecast going forward, and we need to have contingency. But I'm reassured that we probably got as close as anybody last year. And if we've got a 4 million gap in our 5-year MTFS, I don't know how many others are in that position, a handful. So I feel we're in a good place. We make good judgments, and we'll see where we're going. And meanwhile, we will be lobbying to make sure that any increase nationally is covered nationally.
Thank you for that, but I appreciate you got confidence in the MTFS and the way that's all been prepared, but that still doesn't... And by the way, yes, I do remember high inflation. I'm just old enough and more. It doesn't answer my question, is at what point are we going to run into trouble? You're saying we've got good reserves and historically we've coped well. I'm trying to understand, not trying to tie you down on precise numbers, but where's the level within those reserves that will give us the cover that we need? There must be a point theoretically where we would run into trouble. And it's one thing to be confident and say it's well done and all the rest of it, but at what stage will we start to wave a red flag and say, do you know what, guys, we've got a real problem here?
Yeah, you're right to press the point. David, you might be able to help with the actual reserve level, because there's allocated reserves, aren't there, for exactly that purpose, but I can't remember the movement on... We were negotiating on, or talking about fire settlements today, so I could tell you what 1% on wages is for the fire service at the moment. I can't remember it for police. But given that a vast percentage of our costs are pay related, I know we do have those. Have you got a sense of that, David?
Yeah, so in terms of, if we just look at police pay, a 1% sensitivity is just under £1.2 million. So you can see quite quickly how this potentially could escalate. But within the report, we've scheduled in paragraph 5.8 some of the assumptions that forces have made around pay awards for next year. So we've got an assumption in of 3%, which is higher than, well, which is the top end, because sort of in terms of the guidance we've been given around MPCC, you know, in terms of the what happened this year with the government. So the higher pay award that was made this year, and part of that was funded by the Home Office. So it's sort of trying to get the right balance between what is fair and a reasonable assumption compared to the fact if there was a significant pay award. So, you know, for example, this year at £1,900 across all the pay bands worked out at nearly 6%, and part of that was funded then nationally by the Home Office. So it's a real difficult one. But you know, I think this isn't just police either. It's conversations we've been having about fire as well. You know, if we started to assume that pay awards were going to continue into the median term at 5, 6, 7%, then it really wouldn't be affordable. Yeah. So I think, Councillor, it's a really good point, and I haven't got the exact answer for you, but it's one that, you know, we're trying to make the best assumptions that we can. And what we've done is made that 3% assumption for next year and then aligned our assumption to the Home Office Department expenditure limits as we move forward. So we've got some science behind it, but that, as I said earlier doors, that it's very difficult at the moment, isn't it, to get these assumptions right.
Chairman, sorry. Mr. Bones, sorry to interrupt. On the page before there, page 26, so we've got 3% in for next year, and then we're back down to 2 the year after. And as David said, that's actually at the higher end of those forces. I don't mind being there, quite frankly. I minimise the risk and welcome outcome. But we need the world to change quite dramatically, I think, even for 24-25 to get back to there.
Just one final point. Yeah, I really do sympathise with the challenge you've got. I mean, we just take the last couple of years, COVID, Ukraine, energy, these are things that nobody could have ever foresawn. So that's why I think I'm labouring the point, forgive me, about our ability to respond if, again, another completely unforeseen disaster hits us and how that would affect us. But I've said enough. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lees, did you want to?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner David. First of all, I should say that under the circumstances, I think it's very prudent, your budget is very prudent. But I've got questions about assumptions, and I think you've answered a lot of them, and where you got the assumptions from, because they're lower than some of the others I've seen about the 2% and that. So I just wondered where you got them from, but I think you've explained a lot of it. Don't know whether you want to say any more.
Just a little bit, if I may. I mean, that chart on page 26 talks about the assumptions in there. Interestingly, utilities and fuel, 54% increase for next year. So some of them are substantially different from where we were only 12 months ago because of what's going on. And I think if I was investing, I would have some queries about the future beyond on that point. But the right things happen in Russia. China's opening up again. The world could look quite different again in very short order, and I do hope it does.
Keith Walker.
Thank you, Chair. The preset increase in this year is the biggest that the panel is being asked to consider. And we go through the process every year. Is it possible to identify where the revenue from the last precept increase was spent and what benefits accrued from that? And how can you reassure the public who are having to fund this precept increase? How can you reassure the public that this money is going to be spent to benefit their communities?
Thanks, Mr. Walker. You're right. It is a substantial ask in value and percentage, although, as I've said, £1 a month doesn't seem a lot to some people. To others, it's not helpful. In terms of real increase subject to inflation, it won't be. You've been asked to approve above inflation increases before. I'm beginning to wonder whether you actually contributed to the consultation, because mind you, there were 924 respondents, which is great, who actually added a comment. The bulk of the comments for me that I paid most heed to were, I don't mind paying a little more as long as the service improves. Essentially, we need to see more evidence that where we're putting more money in, we're getting more results. And to paraphrase, one or two people have said, we've been putting money in and it's not where it needs to be already. Others are saying if you don't put the money in, you can't improve. So I think the point is well made. We need to be able to evidence how we're committing. This year, The principal changes are around embedding the extra officers, improving the contact team, that implementation of the new local operating model, which was a significant piece of work. Going forward, increasing that investment in personnel, but at the same time, more technology. All our officers now have got up-to-date laptops, up-to-date mobile phones, which they didn't have a year ago. The service isn't stopping working for 2 or 3 hours every few weeks because the IT fell over, which it was doing 18 months ago. There's a lot of investment gone on to make sure that people can get on with the job rather than being distracted from it. There's no shortcuts in things like that. If you stop people working through not investing in the right places, it's a problem. There have been certain projects that I've not been comfortable and have stopped going forward around IT, and better value for money other ones are coming along as a result. And yet we've also looked very carefully at things like the firearms training, where the budget is now substantially less than was being proposed originally. So all through the year, there's been a process of improving, reform, changing process. And bear in mind, we've got this new Chief Constable in barely 12 months, just over 12 months. An awful lot has already happened, but in 12 months, there's only so much you will see the effect of. This next 12 months is fundamental. Those new officers need to land, and the review of our public protection unit, that is rape and sexual assault, children's protection, children being exploited for sexual or criminal purposes, all that sort of high harm work, we never see it. You'll be familiar with it because of your history in the service. You'll know how important that is. The public see visible policing, high streets, unfortunately perhaps neighbourhood issues around burglary. The high harm is at the back end, and we are investing in that now, working with consultants, redesigning, as well as investing in a system to allow us to manage change, because this organisation, like none other I've ever seen, is continually involved in changing and improving to meet today's demands. Getting on 30% increase in local crime is vehicle crime in the last 6 months. That was not there. So a new operation at Bournemouth to do that, a team dedicated to that sort of work. Equally with domestic abuse, and there's new technology going in to help us get interviews on with victims as quickly as possible so that we get that information. You'll be aware, I think, that quite often with domestic abuse, people don't continue to bring charges. So the sooner you can get in and talk to people at the time of a report, the better. So there's a plethora of things that we've spent money on. What I'd like to do, Mr. Walker, is just to take that back, though, if I may, and perhaps in the future, we've got a meeting coming up about how I hold the chief to account, haven't you? Let's bring back to that a summary of where the investments have been this year. The good news is they're mostly around the stuff we said we'd do. And then we've saved some more as well. And then there's some other good news, because there's more new houses, which means getting on for £6 million extra from council tax base. But there's also advantages we didn't perceive around technology and treasury income. Again, you get inflation benefiting us in terms of returns on investments. So with your permission, Chair, we'll bring that back.
Yeah, if you may, that'd be good.
It's one of those tricky questions you get from a panel.
So we could bring that, which meeting do you think?
I think the Commission is referring to the 21st of February.
21st of Feb.
When you're looking at performance and how you hold the Chief Constable to account.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Maycock.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Commissioner. Just want to have a little look at the Fleet Capital Programme, and this may sound like I'm going to be asking you to spend money, but I think if it's done right, it could produce savings elsewhere. With combustion engines going out of phase 2030, looking at the other capital programmes that you've got, that there's no infrastructure being put in for EV. I'm just thinking along the lines of, with more neighbourhood operations going on, that these, with the fleet programme, that could be the community cars, not the full response cars, but the inner city cars. And I think that doing it that way could produce a saving within the fleet capital programme.
Thanks, Councillor Maycock. It sounds like you might be a bit more experienced in this world than me or many others. It's fascinating to watch police services looking at electric vehicles. At the moment, response vehicles run heavy and they run very long days, and where possible, the longest service intervals they can. Now, there are one or two services that are quite keen to be early adopters around EV cars for that type of work. I'm not going there. They haven't proven the capacity to do the job. But for local policing, I think there is definitely an alternative. And in fact, I've been challenged and raised this with the Chief around electric-powered bikes in particular, for officers, PCSOs, who need to get around a tighter area, but reasonably quickly. And I think there's a real opportunity there. There's also not the same implication in terms of charging capacity and networks. Some of our bases have already got problems with parking, let alone setting aside extra areas for charging vehicles. And it's an emerging technology still. It's helpful to see the amount of commercial vehicles that are beginning to consider it and see the practicalities. But recharging and this idea that whatever vehicle you're in, if you're called to respond, you've got to respond. You can't be running out of petrol or battery power 50 miles into the journey. Staffordshire's a big place. You've got to get there. And you've got to be able to refuel if necessary at a moment's notice. So it's one to watch. I am interested, though, in your point about fleet, because we're not looking to expand, in terms of the capital programme, that fleet capacity. And I might just prompt David as to why we've done that, because I know this year we made a considerable investment and had to bring one forward because we couldn't get vehicles. And whilst they're excellent, we bought a bunch of Volvos. They're hybrid vehicles, so efficient, but they still have the capacity to go when the batteries are down. They were more expensive than we were expecting to pay, and they will be more expensive to service. So whether we brought forward some costs there and we're ahead of the game or not, I'm not sure. David, anything specifically on?
I don't think there's anything specific, Commissioner, but I think we just need to bear in mind that you know, in terms of our environmental strategy, you're absolutely right. You know, we are considering it, and the head of strategic transport, Sarah Wood, is looking at how we can move this forward. So we are looking at introducing electric charging points and trying to bring certainly some smaller vehicles into police and to fire as well across the fleet. But the Commissioner's right. There are issues around response cars actually having an electric vehicle option. There aren't any at the moment. So that needs to be developed. And of course, at the moment, in terms of capital, they are more expensive as well. So the procurement side is more expensive as well. But so we're trying to get, I guess, trying to take ourselves forward to make sure we're environmentally sustainable. But at the moment, our options aren't clear at the moment. So I think we need a little bit more time just to get that strategy pulled together.
Just to clarify, I totally understand the point about response cars. Like you say, they're heavy. Staffordshire's very big. Sometimes I need to go from one end to the other. But I completely take your points on board and glad that it's being looked into. Thank you.
One other brief point on that. We've been investing in vehicles and equipment, everything else for response officers because we've got more of them. You know, we mustn't miss the point that in the last 4 or 5 years, we've added an awful lot of officers, and a good chunk of them are going into frontline response policing. So more vehicles, more out there. That is not likely to be quite the same level of increase over the next 4 or 5 years. I think we're going to be seeing it levelling off after next year, and hopefully that's an appropriate number for Staffordshire.
I'd like to ask, in a sense, trying to seek clarity just around the, with regards to risk and clarity around the mitigation actions. Is there something you could actually add to that can give us a little bit more, if you want to say, meat on the bones?
Are you referring to the level of reserves again and where we might go? Well, what was 1% on pay, David? 1.2 million? And how much have we got in the reserves that's not already allocated?
So if we look at the reserve schedules contained in the report. Apologies. But when we look at the MTFS period, so 26, when we get to 26, 27, you know, based upon the assumptions that we've got, we've still got just about £29.5 million worth of reserves that are available. Now, of course, you know, we don't hold reserves without them being earmarked for particular areas, but if, for example, if there was a significant pay pressure coming forward, then we would have to look at our reserves and decide how we were going to reallocate them in order to make sure that we were in a good position to move forward. But I think, you know, the point I made within my commentary, you know, that we still hold a level of reserve that means that our overall financial health is green, if you like. So we have still got options and opportunities in order to reallocate reserves should that be required in the future. So I'm quite comfortable with that level of reserves, and we've got level of reserves that can cope with changes over the next 2 to 3 years. But you know, hopefully things are going to stabilise as the Commissioner says. But I think we're overall in a good position to deal with volatility some volatility as we move forward.
Chairman, it's a question I ask myself because I'm conscious from a past that you look at some authorities that have reserves and you think, gosh, that's a lot of money. When are they ever going to need that? And the challenge is generally more about shouldn't you be using reserves rather than increasing them? I get your point. We are in a more uncertain, riskier future than we've been for a little while. But those are healthy reserves. That's the right sort of percentage as recommended. I'm not minded to increase the level of reserves to account for this. It would mean not providing service or reducing something somewhere else. We're not there. And it's the nature of the service that reserves might be needed for a short-term issue. Government's unlikely to allow something to continue for a long period of time.
Obviously, I think we've come to a stage where we're ready to probably adjourn to say whether we proceed with the recommendation to accept the precept as it is in the budget. I think the bottom line question... Sorry? Oh, Councillor Hudson, sorry.
In our pre-brief that haven't been asked yet. Are they the ones you're going to do now?
No, I was going to an overall. Do you want to...
Yeah, okay. Commissioner, these aren't questions that I specifically asking for myself, but it was some points that were brought up by the other members of the committee before we came in. In the report, it says that there are £176,000 worth of savings not allocated. Can you tell us where those savings are going to be allocated to, please?
So I think just a quick summary on that. So this is just areas where we're still work in progress. So that will be determined. I think, you know, in terms of the overall level, that's not a massively material amount of savings to be delivered. So that will be clear over a short period of time about how that's going to be delivered.
And the second question that came up was, it said that some projects have been removed from the capital programme. can you tell us what projects have been removed from the capital programme, please?
I'd have to come back with a response to that.
I'm not certain what projects have come out the capital programme. I know there's two or three that are delayed.
So the savings that we've identified on the capital financing costs, so the areas in there are things like the firearms training facility is now coming at a lower cost than was originally in there. So we've got savings from that. We've got savings that have come through just really from profiling the capital programme spend from the previous years, because during the pandemic, capital spend was more difficult to do. So there are some savings that have come through from that as well. So there are a number of factors that resulted in the capital programme savings I've identified with the report. But I'm happy to come back, Commissioner, with a more detailed response.
Chairman, yeah, we will come back. Where is that point exactly? Would you mind? Where is it in the papers?
Appendix 1.
Do you have a page?
Unallocated saving of 176k.
It's not a lot of money. No, that's the 176. What were the statement about capital projects? I can think, I know one around the finance and HR system that we're bringing in is considerably under the original budget because it's a different project. But let's detail it if we can. Yeah, so, well, it's not saying there's been projects actually removed, is it? No, we'll detail where some savings are, but I don't believe it's saying that we've actually stopped going ahead with projects. I'm not aware of any specifically.
I think in terms of my answer was covering off the main areas, but I'm happy to come back with some more detail on that. But we've not, the Commissioner's right, it's not because we've cut things out of the programme that we needed to deliver.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. As I say, it was a question that the group came up with, not me specifically. And positive note for the way forward, possibly for our patrol cars, is that a local business to me in Utoxeter is looking at a hydrogen engine, so that might be the way forward for vehicles that need to be topped up pretty quickly. So you never know what the future may hold. That EV may not be the sole future energy. It could be hydrogen. We don't know.
Thank you, Chair. When we talk about risk, I guess most of us think about low, medium, high, and a risk being a problem that might occur. I looked up and found a new phrase this morning, positive risk. You know, the possibility that something might change actually to our advantage and be good news, which we don't normally talk about in these discussions, do we? So I just wondered if there are any areas where you do feel there is a positive risk that things might in fact turn out better than we expect. That way we can end on a brighter note. Thank you.
Well, I guess, Councillor Bowen, that the big, obviously the benefit we've seen now is the investment return. So we hold the cash levels that we hold, we're investing them now and receiving sort of 3% returns. So, you know, our investment returns have gone from very small amounts up to around about £1 million. So for the budget year, so they have increased significantly. So that is I guess that's it. And included in the Treasury Management Report, it's a benefit that we've seen from what's happened recently.
Just before I call Ben, just for clarification, you made reference to Councillor Bowen. Councillor Bowen isn't a councillor, he's one of our independent members of the panel, just for the communication.
Apologies.
I wasn't sure whether Mr. Bowen had been promoted or demoted there for a moment. It would indeed. Only in recent weeks there's been a quite substantial downgrade of the risk associated with fuel and energy costs. So that is where I think is the most potential. Perhaps not so much for our organisation as others that are dependent on it for manufacturing and so on, but it's a bit of an aside, but my son's involved with the gas trade, And the forecasts on gas 2 months ago, before it got warm, were quite frightening. And now they're not warm. Well, now it is warm, rather, in Germany. They're looking at a completely different scenario for the next 12 months. So within weeks, these things can change. Massive, massive differences in price.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, Councillor Edgley.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I just ask one question to you both, David and Commissioner? You know, do you feel clear in your own mind that this budget will cope with any financial crisis that might hit us in the next 12 months, whatever that might be?
It's a big thing to say under no circumstances, but it would need to be a really dramatic situation to absorb, as David's talked about, 27 million pounds of the reserves 4 or 5 years down the line. I think that the world we live in means that some of these numbers will be spot on, some will come short on, and some will overshoot. That was very much the case last year, although we got a lot closer than others. It's a good, solid budget. It balances, and it's a balance between maintaining where we are and investing in the future. And whilst we are asking people to contribute more, we're asking them to contribute less than almost anywhere else in the country. And I think they have confidence that we've got a team that can deliver. So I'm very comfortable with this budget.
Thank you for that question, which was actually quite led into, in a sense, how I was going to summarise where we were. Because I think we have to address that this is not easy doing, especially at this time. We've got economic climate is who can predict what's going to happen next. The cost of living crisis is just complicating that in itself, etc. And obviously requesting a precept that you are, I think the bottom line is, and I think it's been addressed through a lot of the questions that we've put forward today, is that our communities want to feel safe and be assured the police are accessible, etc. So it's really what happens next, isn't it? That we then have to make sure that what you're asking for is spent properly, that can reassure those criteria of safer communities and ensuring that we do have the police force for Staffordshire. So I think on that note, if I could suspend the meeting, we will adjourn and we will come back. So I think no more than 5 minutes. I formally adjourn the meeting and we'll come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you for your patience while we just summed up things. So before us, obviously, we have the to accept the precept and also in the pack to note the recommendations. I think before I just ask for confirmation, to advise confirmation of that, I think in terms of the precept, I think what we're looking at is, as I said earlier, it is all on the delivery. I think what we are wanting to see is value for money, obviously, but we also want to see those actions that are quite clear are really what our communities are stressing for in these difficult times. So in terms of the recommendations, can I ask members to accept what was on the papers, and that we do confirm acceptance of the precept? So that is our. Are we okay with that, members? So thank you very much for the budget and the precept, and thank everybody obviously involved in this piece of work, because it's, as I've said earlier, this isn't easy, and we thank you for your time. So if we can just then move on the agenda. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I did inadvertently miss one item on the agenda, which was any decisions made by the Commissioner. I left it because there wasn't any. So, so I rather just skip by that. So if we could move on to our next item, which is the National Conference for Police, Fire and Crime panels, which I duly attended in person on the 11th of November 2022. Can I ask members if there are any questions from that, from obviously the notes that are in front of you, just to if there's any clarification. But again, those are for noting. Are we okay with those, that summary? Thank you. If I can move on to item 8, questions to the Police Fire Crime Commissioner by panel members. Councillor Edger.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner, I'm going to hold you to account in your last speech when you mentioned about officers being on duty outside schools, police officers being on duty outside schools when there's a problem with parking. It's a question really for Helen. We've got a major, and I know it's throughout Staffordshire, about parking outside schools, but this has been brought to me by the Bassett Community Group, and they're really up in arms with the lack of enforcement or anything that's happening outside the schools. People are parking on double yellow lines. I've been there and I've said people don't, you know, but I've been met with quite abusive language, shall we say. So I'm asking, really, Helen, if she would mind probably coming and having a look, seeing what we can do, because the Bassett Community Group and the public round there are really up in arms. So I'm just asking for help as to how we can solve this situation. And probably, like you say, Commissioner, if the officers will be there, I would really appreciate them coming on board with it. So that's my first. I've got a couple of other questions. Shall I carry on or shall I? Okay, okay. You want me to carry on? Sorry. So I'll leave that one with you, please, Helen, if you can either arrange to come and have a look or what have you, but it's a major problem. My second question relates to the fire station again in Stafford. I know we've spoken about this in the past. Have we come to a conclusion as what's going to happen with that building, please? And also, my third question is about the police station, where we're going with the police station in Stafford. Is that staying where it is, or is it moving forward later on?
Well, Helen and I do like to get out and see local issues, so I'm sure we'll do our best. In the meantime, Councillor, and any councillor or member of the public, do let your local police commander know about particular issues. Feed them through us, if you like, the Commissioner at address, and we'll pass them on. There is more going on in those areas, but as an ex-county councillor as well, I know just how difficult it can be outside schools in general. There's some pretty poor behaviour, actually, and most people ought to know a lot better, especially when they're supposed to be delivering their children safely to school. The Stafford estates, I think I'm going to be in a position to make some clear decisions on that in this financial year. I'm looking to just move things on before April. It's quite interesting, Stafford, because there are a number of opportunities, but I think we're going to end up with a good solution. There's very little money in any of them, so it's not about opportunities to invest in other places. It's more about where are the two police and fire establishments and how can we get them up to spec, because they both need to be improved, and it's a little bit delayed at the minute, so watch this space.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Again, Commissioner, I think you've heard these questions online the other night. Incompatibility with the new technology we've got. We've fitted all CCTV cameras, and it turns out the police force thought we can't download to them. Of course, there's an incompatibility with the CCTV, which is brand new digital technology. And of course, that's what we need to do. Are we making any more moves on that? We need to look into it if we can. That's one. And the next one was, I know we've got defibrillators in all the fire appliances, and we only have defibrillators in the armed response cars. When are we going to get them into the ordinary cars that are called out sometimes on the first? It's a domestic dispute, he's had a heart attack, no defib. Well, if there's one in the car, it's a good idea. And I'm going to put forward this for you, and it will be for you. If you go to EV cars, I want to see an EV charger in the centre of town solely for the police force. And if that's all right with you, I'll push it forward.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Holmes says, some of these things I picked up at a meeting with his parish forum the other day. And there's lots of ways to get this stuff through rather than wait for panels. I'll always move stuff on. I'm going to come back to you on the CCTV thing, because I'm not quite sure why there's an issue there. There shouldn't be. But bear in mind, most of these questions are for operational policing, not for me. Defibrillators are interesting. I know we're looking at the moment at putting stop the bleed kits into response vehicles. There's a different level of expense there. But as you say, if you can save a life, why wouldn't you? However, the police service is not the ambulance service. And there are challenges at the moment in making sure the right people are responding to the right emergency calls. I'm not aware of any more investment in defibrillators outside of what we've already done. But we are looking at stop the bleed kits across the fleet, because that tends to be where the action is. And if you can, or you're saying you'll provide a charger in all the town centres in the moorlands, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
Okay. I've got one question, if I may, Commissioner. Would you agree with me that the decision to put the police at Chasetown in the fire service is a good call for our community?
Yes. I'll say a bit more, though. We've got a shared post there in the Chase Terrace fire station. It's a good location. Particularly important in Burntwood, there's a big conurbation of people there that had not previously had that sort of police post. Most of the team will continue to be tasked from Lichfield, but the neighbourhood team should be able to spend a good additional proportion of the day, or their shift, because it'll be night shifts as well, operating from there. And when I went there the other day, there was some good community activity going on. We met with the fire lead and the local police lead, and I think the community will appreciate that greatly. It's all part of this more visible policing. In most of the other areas, we've got secondary locations anyway. Utoxeter, for example, Biddulph, places like that, big towns that aren't necessarily the main town. So it's a model that's about right now. I'm not looking really for many more of these, but that was an outlier, and I'm glad we could help deal with it.
Commissioner. There'll be no further questions? No? Oh, Councillor Edgeler, yes, we did promise.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's not a question, really. I think it's through the Commissioner, actually, to thank Speedwatch for the amount of work that they do on the roads, and Michelle Shaker. They're doing a brilliant job, and I'd like to say thank you to all the people that's doing Speedwatch throughout their areas, you know, because they do a phenomenal amount of work, and I just wanted to, through you, Commissioner, say thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Councillor Edge. Helen, as you know, has been really busy with this. I think we've added another 10, 15, Helen, this year. They're all doing a fantastic job. Again, at Public Performance recently, we covered this, not to the same degree as before, because we've given it a lot of coverage, but road safety remains a real priority for me. We're not letting up on it. And the positive news now is that there's more support for those teams from roads policing and neighbourhoods in the new model to go out and actually enforce alongside the polite letters as well. It's a good model, and it's working.
Thank you very much. So if we can move on then to our next item, which is the work programme and dates for future meetings. Mandy?
Just to remind everybody that the next meeting is next Monday, the 13th of February, where you'll be considering the fire and rescue budget and precept. And you also have the additional meeting on the 21st of February, when you'll be looking at the recent appeal report, inspection report.
And the additional comments that's come from today's meeting that the Commissioner has assured us. Anything on the work programme, members? No? Thank you. So on that note, at 3:45, I close the meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.